The Anunnaki story. J. Scott thinks back, and like in an old movie, she remembers the flood raging behind her, swallowing everything in its path while clinging onto her father's neck. He held her so tight, running for their lives. It was such a long time ago, and the memory is chopped up in pieces. She sees the bridge they are running on like from a distance. She sees the entrance to the flight central that once were covered in marble bricks, but now while running toward it, it seemed to be throwing away heavy blocks of foundation. She sees the chaos. She sees the people who are hindered to pass, and as soon as they enter, a woman tears her from her father and whispers in the ongoing panic, "You will be safe. I am sorry for this." Then black. She never saw her family after this. Her mother, father, and a brother, they all are just gone. They got buried together with the rest of the planet's spirit. Thanks to her father, she is still alive. Her father said, "Take only the necessary. We must flee." He said they made a crack in the sky ceiling, and because of this it is falling down in very big pieces. J. Skull moves her hand and opens with her movement the running images of a blue planet. She is surviving, floating in the endless creation cradle without her people's spirit home. Of what once was is only a fraction left, and the planet is dead. She looks at the images of the new beautiful life-bearing planet. She asked when she was still a child, why couldn't they just land and start to live again? The general said, "The spirit of this planet doesn't support our spirit, but it will, and that will be your job. You will find a way." J. Skull never could, but the team of engineers did. J. Skull became the fleet general after her guardian, an early general, had passed away. They created a direct link to the spirit. The nursery. J. Skull enters the nursery, and in an incubator surrounded with high technology, a hybrid son is growing. He looks very much different from anything that has ever seen the light of day. His skin is pale, the eyes are small, ice blue, and still his features are much like their own. He is the link. He will talk the language of two spirit worlds, and he will communicate with sound to all living creatures. Within 30 years of our counting, 300 of these hybrid sons will be born on the blue planet, and they will learn to speak the language of the spirit, and when they have spoken, they will tell us what needs to be known. The planet spirit has a voice. It connects all living creatures and all that is continuously transforming. It is not the code which all life is built upon. It is the code that connects all living. It is what is. The general once said to J. Scott, "The easy part is to see what you see. The hard part is to see what doesn't show." J. Scott remembers she couldn't quite understand, and her guardian made the commando bridge turn black in darkness, and he said, "You can't see me now, but you can hear my voice. What connects us?" J. Scott felt enthusiastic when she answered the voice, but the general had just shook his head, and while the bluish light slowly filled the bridge again, he said, "Think." For years, J. Scott tried new answers, but each time the general just shook his head, blinked, and said, "Try again. Unfold that what is, but is untold." The hybrid son dies. The first son who replaced on the new planet died within months. It was a great loss to all of us. Everything seemed to attack him. The smaller inhabitants, from which partly his DNA had been extracted from, fought him. The grass cut his feet, while other creatures rested softly in it. The sun swiftly created boils and tumors on his skin, and the water shut down his intestines one by one. When he spoke to us, the suffering numbed the whole fleet for weeks, and no one could even speak at the time of his death. He was our son. We learned much those months. We had been so busy creating a supermind that we had forgotten all about the body and certain survival attributes as anger. We had to start all over again. The hybrid sons that now were growing up were of no use to us like this. If we would send them to Earth, to Kai, we would send them straight to their death. They had to stay, but they would be given the role as gods. They would contribute to the second generation of hybrid sons, the Nephilims, the Titans, and all creatures we sat upon Earth. we detected some special deviations from the planet's inhabitants. Our first hybrid suns had no pigments. We did see this in animals we had engineered too, however the consequences of this on the animals did not seem to strike them at all. The hardest part were the behavior attributes that amongst others would give the next generation hybrid sons survival qualities in a hostile environment. The result was Nephilim, or Titan as they were to be called by the population of the planet. We balanced the aggressive behavior with size and strength instead of creating a new warrior species. But still we missed the very same thing for why we came, nano-human, father to the son of An. By the year 70 we had placed 40 new generation hybrids on birth, and all other endeavors to communicate with the inhabitants had been a failure since the kings of the planet rose against us. Ishtar, who married the black-headed man-child Mano, and all other hybrids had a gene deficiency. Neither of them could recreate, but they did fancy the inhabitants of the earth and asked for the bliss of children. Our advanced technology, our appearances, the hybrids, the children of the childless, it all added up to us becoming preferable gods instead of those who already with slavery dictated the people, for we had the power to change their world. It started to feel like all our endeavors had been to populate the world with new species. Within 10 years and 300 new children, both males and females, had been born. The asteroid belt, the death of millions of species. Once their spirit home was hit, the rest of the pieces recoiled in the atmosphere across the universe, hitting Earth. Earth was stronger than our home, the general said to J. Scar. She asked him again, what does unfold that what is untold mean? The general looked at her and said, what is that? That we can't see but is for the evidence of it is missing, still it shines as bright as the sun. J. Scar felt more confused and angry. She thought that he could just tell her and not play these riddles. Obviously the answer was important enough to make them spend their lives in space waiting. You must learn to think, he said. Did you ever encounter those nasty small lizards that always came by the hundreds? Those amongst other creatures we breathe in the nursery? J. Scar did remember. She remembers her father running out from the house to help an outer terrestrial tourist in panic. Yes, she answered, I did. They are quite special. That, my dear, the general said, is evolution. That contains the evidence of what you can't see. J. Scar looks back and remembers the man picking fruits in the garden, and one of those small meal lizards with their feet and abdomen covered with small meal-like hair hurried up his leg and swiftly crawled into his ear and to his nose before the man panicked. Father, who was just nearby, shouted at the top of his lungs, don't throw it away. But the man did. So within seconds hundreds of lizards were crawling into all openings they could find on the man's body. My father ran as fast as he could with a jar in one hand and the lid to it in the other. Somehow he managed to calm the man down and took the jar with some sweet gel inside it, caught one of those lizards and dropped it in it. Within just a few seconds the lizards had left the man and they all worked over each other to reach the gel. My father put the lid on and went out to the forest. He said while leaving the shocked man, they are not dangerous. They thought you hid something. Each one is a scout for the rest of the population. J. Scar didn't grow any wiser by that story, but she left the question for now. She mourned the loss of a world. Gilgamesh, the son of Lugalbanda, 1 part man, 3 parts god. Gilgamesh sits by the river, and as he feels the water, he thinks I am connected, and at the same time he is amazed over the beauty that he sees in the scenery. Inside his head he hears J. Scar. What are you doing? You are not focused. He cuts an imaginary bond to his vision and answers her just as if she had stood before him. I was touching the water, which says that in the east the sky is burning and it doesn't feel good. J. Scar was worried. More and more rebellion had raised, and whatever technical advancement they brought to this world, the Titan gods, their own allies, and god kings turned against them. They stole everything to the cost of lives and the lives of new generation hybrid children. Gilgamesh was stronger. His nervous system grew through the back of his spine, all the way out of his skull, leaving the image of a thick and lustrous hair. He was perfect, as J. said. He could fight an army or tame a lion without any effort. He was also the enemy target. They said that when Gilgamesh falls, the city will fall. However, Gilgamesh was fearsome. If any man or woman could prove that they were a friend of his, they would be left alone and not fought down. For Gilgamesh talked to the gods in the sky, and the gods came to him carrying lightning and thunder, creating storms when they arrived. Gilgamesh could spend hours each day connected to J. and to the earth spirit, and he also helped the Nephilim gather supplies to the fleet. There were tables filled with grapes and fruit. There were buckets of metal and cloth, and as thanks to the community, the technical development and social codes increased among the inhabitants. Gilgamesh turned back from the river that evening to the sunset cave, a great tower built by the first hybrids of Dilmun, the carp-headed titans, those who came from the sea, the specialists of rock building, the Apkallu. They lived with and taught the simple man all he needed to know. They were educated and technically advanced. They taught about civilization, me and medicine, but best of all they knew agriculture and how to build these amazing cities in stone. They built the enormous stone structures in lakes and then leveled it. By lowering or increasing it, they could turn the water as they saw fit. Gilgamesh was amazed at the sight. It looked like a mountain from a distance, but when he came closer he could see that rooms and walls surrounding the tower had been carved out from the hard stone. Pillars rose from floor to ceiling, and in the top of the mountain a fountain of light cascaded brightly towards the stars. Gilgamesh saw as he came closer 2 guardians by each side of the wall opening, standing like giant statues, warning anyone who came too close that this is what they will fight if they mean to enter without a citizenship. Gilgamesh was concerned about the fire in the east that Gaia had let him see, and through the cloth-covered stone city he walked to the top of the tower. He saw his likes closing the surrounding doors in their homes as he passed by. Some nodded in respect. When he entered the great hall of light at the top of the mountain, he saw his father god, Lugalbanda. "Why are you here?" Gilgamesh said, and was surprised that the old but first of the hybrid gods paid him a visit after so many years. Lugalbanda looked at his son. "I know you will ask our fathers for more strength by the holy light, but each time you gain more power, son, I can feel through Gaia, holy mother of gods, that you are changing." Gilgamesh had noticed a small disturbance within himself, but he wasn't too sure about it. "It's controllable," he said as he knelt in the light. This light, his father said, was not supposed to strengthen you. It was supposed to bring life to hybrids made by our hand. Lugalbanda put his hand on Gilgamesh's shoulder, but Gilgamesh swiftly shook it off. "Who," he said with the spoken word, "will save our gods and titans from the gods and titans we ourselves created, now that our world is burning? In all my knowledge of 3 languages, I also feel you, Father, and you are losing your strength to shield your people." Within seconds Gilgamesh started to glow, and the veins on his neck pulsated in heat, all broken up like toes of the river and blue to the color. He rose and turned around with such great power that the whole of light came upon like thunder. He grabbed his father by the neck and pushed him against the stone wall and said with the spoken word, "I will do your job, fool. I have a rebellion to depress. I will suffocate the insolent bastards. No more gods than you with your cowardliness." Lugalbanda opened a link to J. "Stop, Gilgamesh. Stop my son." J. got the order as she went to the nursery to check the progress of the new lizards. You don't say no to Lugalbanda since he spent so many years as a good god and king. She wished that she could have heard Gaia too, but Gaia was ascended from earth and the mother of the hybrids, and therefore not connectable without one. J-Scar returns as quickly as she can to the bridge, and with a movement of her hand she sends an electric shock through Lugalbanda that makes Gilgamesh get electrified and shot back. He lost his grip and fell down. J-Scar asked Lugalbanda, "Show me what you see." Lugalbanda blocks J-Scar this time. He recovers from the loss of air. "I love you, my son. This is one of the gifts we were blessed with. Don't lose this," he says. Gilgamesh tries to feel but feels nothing. He only remembers feelings, and suddenly he realizes that he lost contact with Gaia. "I will do what is needed of me," he says with the spoken word. Part 2, Creatures of the Sea, year 1714. Emmanuel J. Cook looked down into the sea from the side of his ship and stared straight into the eyes of the creature. The air seemed to tremble and the surface of the sea boiled. Was this his imagination? Emmanuel thought to himself. Did in fact the universe burn off energy? The intensity in this meeting felt like buzzing electricity. He swore that he had never seen such beauty or felt so alive. Just as he was about to reach out to the creature, the crew of the ship came screaming and hitting tin mugs and plates with spoons and tools. They threw whatever they could find on the abomination. As a heavy object hits the creature, she starts to scream like a siren, and the noise cuts like knives through everyone's heads, except for the captain's. This was something he would never forget, and led him out on a journey to find what he thought was the sirens from Greek mythology. What he found, however, was something that he had never expected. Captain's Log, 1714. Day 34. The world will gaze when I reveal the secret, and all that is history will be puzzled together. Day 40. I have been captured by this tribe, and it doesn't look like I have much of a chance of getting out alive. Day 51. I am rescued. I couldn't believe my eyes. But from the blue sea rose that creature to his aid. Emmanuel is a well-dressed senior captain in his 40s, proud and intelligent. He had made so many journeys across sea that he couldn't remember them all today, but never had he sunk a ship, he proudly thought. He made enemies with his words. If you sink a ship, you should probably stay on shore. Emmanuel thought that no weather and no turn of the mistress' temper was bad enough to go down, but a bad captain can sink a ship even in a puddle. He put on the captain's jacket, drew his fingers through the black thick hair, and his blue eyes evaluated the image in the mirror. "This is good enough," he said out loud. As he opened the cabin door, he entered the hall with a dark-hitting command. "Jones, get your lazy dog bones together. We have work to do." The plan was to as soon as possible travel by land to the Sea of Galilee. When the muster of the Queen finally saw shore, the sun gazed, and the redhead, pale-skinned Jones with freckles all over his face wiped his sore sunburned lips. "Captain, shouldn't we wait until sunset before we do more?" Emmanuel looked at the young cabin boy and tried to see how much more work could be drawn from him before he fell. "Take the rest of the day off, Jones. You deserve it. We anchor as soon as possible and continue tomorrow morning before sunrise." Emmanuel started to plan this journey 1 year ago after the encounter of what he thought was a mythological creature. He had been told about the sea beasts that were to be found all over the world with different names. What he thought to be more interesting was that they were also called Titans, sea pirates sailing the Mediterranean Sea. He knew of the folklore flowing widely and the generally superstitious mind of people. He didn't want to be one of them, yet he saw what he saw. They all did that day. Jones is shot in the head. As Emmanuel strolled the harbor just before sunrise, he hears a gunshot and Nathan's voice. Then some men screamed infidel, infidel echoing between the stone and concrete buildings. Jones had explored the city of Akko that night after they'd anchored in Tolmais, and the captain had given him the rest of the evening off. He took Nathan with him. Nathan was a big brute man with a large blonde, grayish beard and eyebrows that were much too big for his face. Nathan didn't look English at all. If you believed in blonde Vikings, then that's what he looked like. Being a member of the royal fleet, they all had to appear proper, but Nathan was the kind of man you loved for his loyalty and feared for his looks, strength, and will. He just wasn't someone you'd correct. To Jones, he was a role model of masculinity and the father he'd never experienced. Once he was old enough and had earned enough money, he thought he would leave the fleet to start a family and become like Nathan to his future children. When they had walked the streets of Ptolemais for some hours and enjoyed the fresh air of the night, they stopped to get some sleep on the stone dock by the sea. Jones rolled his jacket together and put it as a pillow under his head while Nathan looked at the stars and talked about the adventures that they'd already experienced with the captain. Suddenly 2 men appeared from nowhere. Jones only got the time to see one man hitting Nathan in the face with something before he heard a sharp explosion and felt a demonic pain as if the inside of his head suddenly caught on fire. Just like if a spear had penetrated his forehead, the pain spread through his skull in less than a second, and in the far distance he heard Nathan's voice. He felt the chill of dying, then no more. Nathan shouts at the top of his lungs. Jones shot in the head. His voice was like thunder, and as he called out for attention, he grabbed a basalt stone and threw it toward the fleeing men. The stone hits one of them in the head, and the man screams, "Infidel, infidel." To Nathan's good fortune, his skull is harder than what he got hit with himself, so tumbled, but not unconscious, he acts quickly to get up on his feet. He lifts the young freckled cabin boy up and starts walking toward the ship. The tale of an Anunnaki. It didn't take long before Emmanuel found Nathan carrying Jones in his arms, but before he could call the rest of his crew to aid, they were ambushed by something that Emmanuel thought looked like men from an ancient tribe. He tried to fight, but they were too many and seemed to be stronger and quicker in every way. The captain and Nathan got knocked down and all went black. It felt like days later when Emmanuel finally wakes up. He is tied to his hands and feet, and it looks like he is in a cave of some sort. The stone walls are colored, and if he wasn't in such despair he would say that it was eminent and beautiful, but now it was a prison. "You are in the city of Petra, the stone city," a soft female voice said. Emmanuel turned around, and behind him on her knees, the mermaid sat which he had seen 1 year ago. In front of her Jones lay dead, pale and naked on a bed of stones and myrrh. Behind them a fire was burning, and the cave smelled like herbs and something he couldn't really identify. "What are you doing with my cabin boy?" "He is dead. For God's sake, give him the decency of some clothes before his final rest." "What savages are you people?" She smeared the dead body with oil as she spoke. "I am Rebah. I belong to this nomad people. We live like this," she says, "all the way from the caves by the Sea of Galilee to the Red Sea. We are all craftsmen in the beginning who worked with stone shaping, building, water, herbs, and metallurgy. This city," Rebah says, "was our trading post. Our ancestors sold stone craft here to the whole world. It was like the biggest building exhibition ever seen. The 100-meter walk into the king's treasure were lit up by burning oil, and waterfalls were carefully planned, taking routes down the mountains. It looked like heaven. Every family had their specialty. Some made basalt stones to roads, some did obelisks or statues or temples. The city bloomed, and we grew to be thousands. Then the wealth of the city and the secrets of the people became a burden to a jealous king. He wanted it all and allied with others. In his cruelty he slaughtered those who freely didn't become slaves, and the desert dried only a few months later. Reba turns from the cabin boy with a curved knife. That in first impression scares Emmanuel, but instead of attacking him, she lets him loose. She puts her finger to her lips and whispers, "Be silent now and watch." The flickering flames grew smaller as Reba got on her knees again, and Emmanuel thought that she was praying. Emmanuel didn't like this at all, but without really consenting to anything, he lets her continue. From the wall above his head he sees a creature, much like an anemone from the sea, with hundreds of tentacles slowly crawling down. He could barely see this jelly substance since it was mostly seen through, and by instinct he reaches for the knife to kill it. Reba swiftly grabs his hand. "Hush," she says, "only to watch." "What is it?" Emmanuel whispers. "They are called souls or symbiotic angels." Reba, "Hush him." The anemone crawls down the wall and onto the body and back of the deceased. Along his spine the tentacles split the skin open and presses itself inside. For a moment Emmanuel can see the skin on Joe's back bubble and move, but then it stops and disappears. Reba smiles and continues to whisper with enthusiasm, "Watch, watch." Emmanuel can't make a sound, and soon Joe's head moves a bit, and through the hole in his skull the blood starts pumping again, and with a popping sound the bullet falls out. Emmanuel's stomach turns inside out and he has to vomit. Reba orders. With a deep inhale and delivering scream, young Joe's then comes alive, and just as suddenly as he started, he stops to scream. Quickly he gets up on his feet and all confused discovers that he is completely naked. He tries to cover himself when he sees Reba and shouts out like he was deaf, "Where the hell am I? Captain, have I been drugged?" Reba looks at the shocked captain, who was gasping for air himself. "You can talk to Jones now, Emmanuel." Then she turns to Jones and says, "You're alive." Later that evening, outside the cave, Reba and her people start to tell the tale about the Anunnakis. Captain Emmanuel, Nathan and Jones are the guests of honor, and even though the story about the Anunnakis seemed to be explaining everything, they had the feeling it was more religious beliefs than actual events. Before they go to sleep, Reba takes them into a new cave, well hidden from curious spectators. "This is Jaiska," she says, and points across the cave floor and a pond with running water from the walls. Small holes were made in the top of the cave that let the moonlight shine through. They see the head of a sleeping something that Reba claimed to be one of the most important creatures on both earth as in heaven. Jaiska was soaring a couple of centimeters above the water. Jones rubbed his sideburns. "Can we take the head?" he asks. Everyone turns and looks at him a bit surprised. "No," Reba says. "She is just an image." But Emmanuel counters the head does have a complete reflection in the water. Emmanuel is still curious about why Reba had been so far out in the sea when he first saw her, and wants to know. Reba smiles and nods her head. "Tomorrow I will show you something. The Sea of Galilee." The following morning they begin to travel by camel to Gennesareth. Reba and the others are very tense. She explains that the Sea of Galilee and the port of Akko are highly guarded by different countries and cultures. The different groups of nomads circling suspect everyone for treasoning. She says, "You better have eyes in your neck if you want to keep it." In the cave he sees this water woman pour pulverized feldspar and tear small pieces from paper-thin copper sheets and place it inside a goat's bladder. Then she mixes salt water with vinegar in a larger bowl and heat it up on a slate. Emmanuel is astonished. He had no idea of what she was doing, but by now he knew that her education and knowledge must be amazingly rich. As he looks at her while she works, he can't help but feel that strong connection to her again, just as he had done 1 year ago. Besides that she was beautiful, he felt that he needed her more than anything else. Maybe, he reflected, that was the reason he let her save Jones before he knew that this was what she was doing. She took a string of leather and tied the opening of the bladder together and said, "Come, we don't have much time." As they dived into the water of Galilee, Rebbe swam quickly and experienced one of the big basalt stones and dug a hole beneath it to place the bladder. In only a few moments the bladder seemed to increase in size and magically began to lift the rock. By the time she had finished moving it, Emmanuel had been up by the surface several times gasping for air, while Rebbe didn't seem to be bothered at all. He thought it was a bit peculiar but left it for now because he didn't want to miss this for anything in the world. Back on land he asks her, "I am amazed, but why do you move blocks underwater?" Rebbe smiles as always and answers briefly, "My ancestors changed where the water flowed in the channels like this. Some areas needed to be flooded because of the dry earth. Some areas needed to be built, but how to build when we cannot move heavier objects above water than our own body weight? Then, of course, the best quality stones are underwater." Emmanuel and Rebbe goes back to the others, and while they walk he asks her again why she was so far out in the Mediterranean Sea the first time he saw her. For the first time since he met her, she becomes serious. "Emmanuel, this land belongs to no one. It is the cradle of birth, where it all began. The value of it needs to be understood. If I tell you the end before you understand the beginning, the end will only serve as the beginning of assumptions that do no man no good but feed new conflicts, war and destruction." Emmanuel wasn't comfortable with that answer and suspected she told him a riddle only to confuse him and make him leave the question. He decided to not let her dribble him away from the subject. He took her by the shoulders. "Tell me," he said, "how you could swim in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea and scream like a siren. And while we're at it," he continued, "how could you hold your breath for more than 20 minutes just now in the Galilee?" Rebbe shook loose from Emmanuel's grip. She turned around and lifted her hair up so her neck became bare. Because of these, Rebbe stated, offended from the mistrust of Emmanuel. On each side of her neck, curved toward her shoulders, she opened a row of gills. "Is it time now for you to say I am an abomination?" Rebbe asked while she let her hair down and turned around. Her eyes were filled with tears and her bright smile had turned into a thin and stubborn line. Emmanuel nodded. "Yes," he answered. There were nothing of a mermaid about Rebbe. She didn't solve his mythological quest for answers. She was, for all he knew, exactly what Rebbe said herself. An abomination, something that went wrong in nature. The journey back to Ptolemais was tense because of all the curious eyes along the way. Emmanuel didn't say a word, but Jones and Nathan seemed to have a blast with these creatures of the sea. They had such a great time that it really disturbed Emmanuel. A mile before they reached the old city Akko, Jones stopped his camel. "Wait, something is wrong," he says. The company pulls in and turns to Jonas, who is starting to look very pale. "Look," he says and tears his shirt off. On his chest and belly, blue and red lines are starting to cover him like a very detailed map. Rebbe rides up to him and puts her hand on his belly. "The angel is sick," she whispers. Emmanuel, who feels such disgust towards Rebbe right now, breaks out and calls, "Let him be freed." In a few seconds the group of nomads move in front of Emmanuel to hinder him from reaching Rebbe, and Jones, Farsa, brother of Rebbe, rides up to him, and while he uncovers a rifle beneath his thumb, you say in a low baritone-like voice, "Jones died once. Do you want to kill him again? I don't care what you think of my people, but if you call either one of us freak again, I will shoot you myself. The only reason for your insolence are the fact that your queen won't pay for the story you bring her. Your ego is bigger than your intelligence. I told Rupa when she started to watch over you 20 years ago that you were no good." Emmanuel wasn't especially fond of being corrected. He had his status with the queen. It didn't matter if she loved brandy more than life. She had a brilliant mind for the truth. God knows she'd experienced life in every hurtful way. This acquaintance gave him a position that even made generals green with envy. Emmanuel was used to speaking his tongue and to be honest. When had he been wrong? Emmanuel looks at Pharaoh's rifle, then at Farsa, then he moves his eyes and nod toward Ribah. Oh, he says, 20 years. So, you say that Ribah, who is barely 20, herself watched over me for 20 years. Emmanuel laughs with the intent of making Farsa irritated. What? Emmanuel calls, did she watch over me as an egg from her toad mother and barracuda father? Nathan, who had been silent since the captain and Farsa started to argue, couldn't keep his tongue anymore. It was me. Emmanuel, who was seconds away from exploding, turned to Nathan and without a word he stared him out. Nathan wasn't the man who felt uncomfortable in the presence of the captain, no matter the captain's mood. He really liked Emmanuel. They were a good team, always watching out for each other, going through hell just to survive some battles. Nathan thought that Emmanuel's acquaintance with the Queen had given him coal for his vivid theories. Nathan himself didn't have any theories at all. He was a fighter, but also a mathematician somehow. He just seemed to understand how to calculate everything. Nathan knew that the captain loved this about him. It was me, Nathan says again. I told Ribah to tie you the first day by your hands and feet. Nathan looks straight to Emmanuel as he speaks. Emmanuel feels riddled. As this was so not in place at this time, he asked confused, what are you talking about? Nathan lowered his head without letting go of the captain's eyes. The Queen is dead. Emmanuel kept looking at Nathan. He could not for the world make sense of the actions that had been done towards him and that they'd have anything to do with the possibility of the Queen's death or the situation right now. Suddenly the earth starts to shiver and small stones begin to roll to their right. What is this? Emmanuel shouts as a thunder grows. Is it a cavalry or a breaking herd of animals? Farsa grabs Emmanuel's jacket and leans toward him. For the point, Ribah is 2,000 years old. Then he let Emmanuel go and called his group to flee, leaving Emmanuel, Nathan, and Jones behind, abandoned. When they reached the port of Ptolemais, the muster of the Queen was gone. Jones became sicker, each hour passing, and Emmanuel was planning to charge the crew for treason and mutiny. Nathan attended Jones the best he could, but the red and blue veins spread across his body faster and faster. Nathan had seen this before, in blood poisoning, and that there were not much to do if they couldn't convince Ribah to come back and help them. He didn't want to cross his captain and knew that this situation was because of him. Still, letting Jones die when it wasn't necessary didn't rhyme in his mind. Nathan wandered off to the captain after he had made sure that Jones were well taken care of by the villagers. He found the captain in an ancient theater. You know what beats me the most, Emmanuel says to Nathan as Nathan sits down beside him, looking out at the sea. No, Captain, Nathan mumbles. Emmanuel looks at Nathan. I never met a free man before, or woman. Nathan rolls a cotton leaf between his fingers, taken on his way to the theater, to Emmanuel. Pumped with enthusiasm after hearing his captain regain his wit, he asks, so, how will we find Ribah? Emmanuel's eyes got a confident look. I think I know how to, he says, while he rises and throws his jacket off. Emmanuel started walking down the stairs of the theater at an accelerating speed and toward the sea. If all this is true, she will find me, he shouts to Nathan before he dives into the great big blue. Nathan stands up too and says to himself, I hope so, Captain. I truly hope so. The world is curious about the city of Akkad since we learned about nature. We all were engaged with the truth. But each man's own truth is also what blindfolds him, is it not? Ira, the currents of the Mediterranean pulled Emmanuel deeper down into the sea and more far out than he'd wished from the beginning. Each time this happened, he thought his life was over, but just as quickly the current brought him up to the surface. Soon he saw nothing of the harbor, and Israel looked like a ship in the distance. Within his mistress, he had to confess that her strength had nothing to do with the skills of a captain. Sometimes she pulled him down, dragging him across distances of sand and sharp stones. Sometimes she was spitting him out like leftover bones into the open air. He'd counted wrong, he thought. With open wounds all over his body and blood mixing with the water, he'd soon become food to whatever was lurking down there. From nowhere, a hand suddenly appears and catches him, just as if the sea had lost its strength to land. Ribba pulls him up as if he bore only the weight of a seagull. "Who am I?" she asks. Her eyes are intense and her mouth still keeps a thin line. No matter how happy Emmanuel was of seeing her, he couldn't let his pride go just yet. He coughs out sea water and feels his throat and lungs burn and probably will stop working at any minute. Still, he replies, a mummy with a remarkable deal of vibrancy. Emmanuel's cut wounds from the underwater journey were pulsating out blood from the top of his chest and arms down into the water. Ribba looks at him but ignores the remark, and in the wild of the sea, she twines her long black hair around his hands. "Hold on," she says. "This will go fast." When they reach shore, Ribba let the captain go as if he had been a keg of dead weight. While she walks the beach toward the city, she says, "You meet Jonas. I need you. Let's save your cabin boy again. I don't have much time." Emmanuel picks seaweed from his shoulders as he rises, all tended up from the Mediterranean experience. But why is time needed? Emmanuel was thinking about the bullet. Ribba turns to Emmanuel. "Because Jonas is allergic to the angel. That's why. I told you about the Anunnakis. Maybe you didn't listen." Emmanuel countered, "But how?" Ribba answered, "I will change my angel for his." Emmanuel has no more strength and falls down on the shore. He watches Ribba leave and thinks before he passes out, why does Ribba have an angel? Witch hunters. Farsa states when Emmanuel woke up, they poured gallons of water down Ribba's throat. Emmanuel didn't really follow anything of what's been said. Silently he observes Farsa clicking a thin metal figure between his fingers by the window of the small room. "What?" Emmanuel asks. Farsa looks at Emmanuel. "You asked why Ribba carried an angel. I told you. She breathes water as much as plants eat manure." Farsa throws the little metal figure on Emmanuel's stomach. "If you care for Ribba, you need to save her. She saved you and your cabin boy before, but after today, she will be the one dying, and all this because of a reason." Emmanuel understands this, but as he were right now, he didn't understand the depth of what he obligated himself to do. He asks again Farsa, "What am I supposed to do?" Farsa was investigating Emmanuel from toe to head, and then he said, "Do you know what a spaceship is?" "What is a spaceship?" In the year 17 we knew everything, but still we searched for the truth. Not that we don't already know about it, but for whatever legacy we leave, they in the future won't have to know more. What is a spaceship? Emmanuel lets his mind wander. A ship, oh this is clear. In space, a Hobbes must be on sea. Emmanuel wrinkles his forehead, and with an exhausted voice he replies to Farsa, "I am the captain of a spaceship." Farsa looks at Emmanuel with his eyes wide open, then he lifts his eyebrows and starts to laugh. Emmanuel can't understand what could be so funny and makes a gesture with his hands to show he doesn't follow. Farsa then laughs even more and begins to walk out from the little room. 2 days later, Emmanuel met with Farsa again. This time he gets invited to an underground room just beneath the city. Farsa sits in front of some very old scrolls, and when Emmanuel enters, he looks up and says, "The Annunaki Bible is not a religious Bible. It tells of history thousands of years back and even the future. These scrolls are all that has been found, but we know there are many, many more. I will read these to you, since you don't speak our language." Farsa looked down again. "After I read them, you will begin to understand what it is you have to do. Only the real Annunaki Bible will tell the truth."